I'm Associate Professor Tan Ek Ling, and I work for the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University, and I'm passionate about scientific literacy. Teaching students the authentic way with which scientific knowledge is constructed is extremely important because students need to appreciate what we call the nature of science. They need to appreciate that scientific knowledge does not come about from a single experiment. Scientific knowledge comes about from multiple experiments that scientists carry out. So teaching the students authentic process of how scientific knowledge is discovered helps them to appreciate what they learn in their textbook, what they read in their textbook. It also helps them to appreciate that these knowledge do not come about in a simple manner. You and I are lay people, right? So as lay people, one of the key questions everyone asks is, why do I need to bother about science? My grandmother didn't bother about science, but she lived a wonderful life. So why do you need to bother about science? Now, increasingly, the world that we live in are bombarded with artifacts of science and science discovery. Even your everyday diet, you need to know because it helps you make informed decisions. Take, for instance, you can make a grocery run in the store. Now, a little scientific knowledge will help you decide whether you should be consuming or buying butter or margarine. The science behind butter and margarine, it's about whether it is polysaturated or polyunsaturated, and about how at high temperatures, how the saturated fats become free radicals and how this would possibly react with the DNA inside your body. Scientists are discovering more and more evidence about which is better. And right now, the science seems to suggest that butter is healthier than margarine. So you need to have that scientific knowledge as a layperson so that you have a healthier and more active lifestyle. One of the things which people start to think about, especially scientists, is that you tend to frown upon conventional wisdom, folk knowledge. You know, when your mom or your grandmother tells you something, you go, oh my goodness, that's folk knowledge, or oh my goodness, that's superstition. It's very easy to do that. Now, I'd like to propose the idea that conventional wisdom can serve as starting points for scientific inquiry, right? So some things that we don't know about, we will try to understand the phenomena and then to set up scientific experiments to try to investigate what are the basis of this conventional wisdom and to make it into a systematic study. We've all experienced this. A friend sends us an article they read, says it's going to change the way we eat. You really need to read this, they say. This article says most of the foods that you eat, the fruits, the vegetables, are potentially harmful to your body. This produce has been genetically modified. Now, this idea sounds a little strange, but when you read the article, it sounds coherent. And when you Google the subject, there are pages and pages of the article that seem to support this idea. So should you just dismiss this idea because your instincts tell you so, or should you accept it as true? There is another option. Investigate it yourself. And if you care about the issue, it's the only way to approach it. You need to study the issue like a scientist. You need to follow a heuristic, a practical method for critiquing and judging a claim like this. Genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, are plants and animals that we've intentionally modified to have traits we want. While this sounds futuristic, the actual practice goes back millennia, where we crossbred different breeds and strains of plants and animals to emphasize traits we prefer. The modern science of genetics was established in mid-19th century by Gregor Mendel, an Austrian friar and biologist who performed rigorous experiments with crossbreeding pea pods. But when people are talking about dangerous GMOs, they are usually referring to horizontal gene transfer, where genetic material is taken from one organism and artificially placed in another. Humans became capable of this in 1970s, and since then, the technology has been used across thousands of animals and plants that we use and consume. We use GMOs all the time. So take, for instance, the tomatoes that you see in the supermarkets. They are nice and orange and juicy and succulent. If you think about it, to transport these nice succulent tomatoes from one place to another takes a long time. And in places where there is cold and harsh winter, Usually, the farmers suffer from the crops actually freeze, and then these tomatoes have to be thrown away. Scientists realized these problems, and what they did was they actually went to look at the fish. Now, fish in very cold countries, they can actually survive freezing temperature. I mean, you've never seen a frozen fish in the lake, right? There must be something within the fish that prevents it from freezing in the lake. So what they did was they studied what was this anti-freeze gene that the fish carry. And because of our genetic sequence has been so advanced, scientists were able to take the anti-freeze gene from the fish and transfer it into tomato plants. So what happens now is that the tomato plants, even in deep winter, will not freeze. And so they can be harvested and transported to other parts of the world. So this actually is genetically modified tomatoes, and it's to our benefits. Otherwise, you and I may not actually have that many tomatoes to eat. Pseudoscience is obsessed with GMO because in pseudoscience, they try to present GMOs as Frankenfood. Remember Frankenstein? It's a monster. So they are trying to present GMO as food that you should never consume. People who view GMOs as Frankenfood are people who are actually using or consuming science not from a scientific perspective, but from an everyday experience perspective, which is not wrong, but is limiting. As lay people, we should approach GMO with an open mind, right? That GMO has been tested in the laboratory in robust and systematic manner, and that a lot of times these GMOs have enhanced the nutritional value of the food that we consume. When you are actually looking or reading an article, it is important to be mindful to ask yourself, does this article have empirical data? Basically, data that is obtained from investigation, from doing an experiment. And of course, how many times have this experiment been carried out? Is it just once, or have they repeated this and keep getting the same data? So repeatability or reproducibility is a key feature in a scientific study. When you come across a piece of scientific journal article, how do you evaluate it for validity and reliability? Now, it's important for us to know how to do this. And I'm just going to go through with you a couple of ways with which you can use to evaluate the validity and reliability of an article. Firstly, look at the article and ask yourself, how many claims is this particular article making? Is it 1, 2, or 3? Now, most scientific articles will not make more than 5 or 6 claims because that's just too many in one article. After you've looked at the claims, look for the evidence. All the claims must be supported by usually empirical evidence. When you are looking for the empirical evidence, look for the research method. How did the scientists design the experiment? How many times did they carry out the experiments? Did they get the same results each time they carry out the experiments? If they didn't, what were the variability? After you've looked at that, look at the scientific reasoning behind how they support or how they connect the claims with the evidence. Now, scientific reasoning really is the body of knowledge of science that's already out there that enables scientists to build on, to make new claims. So when you are actually looking through this particular scientific article, look at these 3 components. Now, there's one more area which I think you also should pay attention to, and that is this particular study funded? And if it is a funded study, who is the one funding the study? Because the identity of the funder is important in how the article is actually written, because it could actually be used to pursue an area that the funders want the scientists to go. A real useful piece of scientific finding or research will be one that actually positively improves the lives of people, and it has great impact on people's lives. For instance, the study with the air fryer showed that if you cook the French fries at high temperatures, it actually produces carcinogenic, cancer-causing compounds within the French fries. When the study was published, manufacturers of the air fryer actually says that, well, you know what? When we sell you the air fryer, we tell you that you need to only use or cook French fries in a specific temperature range. Too high a temperature might actually result in the production of these carcinogenic compounds. So as a layperson, this particular study is important to you, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. how then can you use this piece of information to inform your next step? Do you want to continue to use the air fryer? Do you want to do more fact-finding? How does it work? Why does it happen? So these are ways with which a layperson can actually consume a piece of information produced by a specific scientific study. When you are actually reading something or when you've come across a scientific claim, it is always a good idea that you don't just rely on a single source, that you look at multiple sources of information. So for instance, if a friend comes by and then gives you a health supplement and say, you know what, this is actually excellent. It helps me with removing all the wrinkles on my face. Would you then take that as truth and start to consume and start to buy lots of these health supplements? I hope the answer is no. Because one of the things that you need to do is to learn how to evaluate and to go and look for alternative sources. What are the active ingredients in here? Why is it so effective? Are these bioactive ingredients harmful to my health? Now, please find out from other sources first before you actually decide that this is something I like to consume and I like to use it. Pseudoscience really only has influence because it offers an answer to questions people have. If you care about spreading sound scientific knowledge, you really need to understand and empathize with what draws people to this message. While it is incorrect, it very often comes from a place of real concern. Skepticism about GMOs, for example, may arise from honest anxieties about the environment, pollution, and processed food in our diet. These are all legitimate issues, so we do not want to dismiss them. Rather, we need to understand where these concerns are coming from and work in injecting science into the collection of beliefs that are yet supported by evidence from systematic study. If something you understand to be pseudoscience is spreading and you care about stopping it, you first need to understand why its audience care about it in the first place. When you know that, you can actually make the case for real documented research and solutions. Scientific literacy doesn't mean you ask fewer questions. It means you commit yourself to answering them better. If we know that something is pseudoscience, instead of just throwing it out and dismissing it, I think one of the things we can possibly do is to understand why this specific piece of information is spreading and why people choose to believe them. So there could be a lot of emotions which are attached to pseudoscience. And so once we understand that, we are better able to combat the pseudoscience and replace it with a more systematic study, a more scientific way to examine the phenomena. So how do you reply to someone who sends you a pseudoscience article? There are several things you can do. Firstly, it depends on how well you know this person, right? If you know this person very well, it is important that you sound this person out and ask, where did you get this article from? Why do you believe what is written in this article? If you don't know this person very well, you might very well choose to ignore and not pass on this article to any other people. If you feel passionate enough to make a public stance about this pseudoscience, you might want to write an article in response to where this article is coming from. Try not to use this opportunity as you correcting others. This is an excellent opportunity to tell someone who is interested in the topic about real science and to convince people who believe in pseudoscience about what real science is and what real science can do.